Some stories are just so wild, they sound like they're straight out of a movie. Well, today we're diving into one of those. It's one of the most insane true survival stories you'll ever hear. We're talking a plane crash, the Amazon rainforest, and a 17-year-old girl at the center of it all. Okay, just take a second and look at that number 10,000 feet. We're talking nearly 2 miles, straight down. From an altitude like that, well, let's be real, the chances of survival are pretty much zero. And yet, somebody did. A 17-year-old girl fell those 10,000 feet out of a plane that was literally coming apart around her and landed in the middle of the Amazon jungle, and she lived. It's an absolutely mind-blowing story. So, let's get right into it. All right, so let's set the scene. It's Christmas Eve, 1971. You can just imagine the atmosphere, right? Everyone's in a good mood, boarding a flight, just trying to get home to their families for the holidays. So the flight is LANSA Flight 508, and on that flight are a 17-year-old named Julianne Kupke and her mom. Now, here's a really important piece of the puzzle. This airline, LANSA, had a terrible reputation, just awful. And to make matters worse, the plane itself, a Lockheed Electra, was known to be, well, not great for handling the kind of intense turbulence you'd expect flying over the Andes, which is exactly where they were going. So about 30 minutes after takeoff, things go very, very wrong. They fly right into this massive thunderstorm. The turbulence is just insane, shaking the plane like a toy. And then, bam, at 21,000 feet, lightning hits the right wing. The fuel tank just goes up, and the whole plane starts to disintegrate in midair. And Julianne, still strapped into her seat, is just thrown out into the sky. Okay, so the big question is, how on earth is it even possible to survive something like that? It really came down to this trifecta of unbelievable, almost miraculous events. First, the storm that brought the plane down also created these powerful updrafts, winds blowing upwards, that actually slowed her descent, kind of like a natural parachute. Second, the whole row of seats she was still strapped to started spinning, which created this sort of helicopter effect, slowing her down even more. And then, the final piece. She landed in the thickest part of the Amazon jungle, where the dense canopy of trees and vines basically acted like a giant safety net, cushioning her fall. But here's the thing. Surviving the fall, that was just miracle number one. The real test, the true nightmare, was only just beginning. She wakes up the next morning. It's Christmas Day of all days, on the floor of the jungle, and she is in bad shape. I mean, really bad. A broken collarbone, a sprained knee, deep cuts all over her body. One of her eyes is swollen completely shut. She has a massive concussion. And on top of all that, her glasses are gone, so she can barely even see. But here's the thing about Julianne. She wasn't your average teenager. Not by a long shot. She had basically grown up at this place called Panguana, a biological research station that her parents, who were zoologists, ran deep in the Amazon. So she knew the jungle. She knew what was dangerous, what to stay away from, and maybe most importantly, she knew how to not panic. And that unique upbringing, it was about to become the single most important thing in her life. So, she's alone, she's badly hurt, but her survival instincts kick in. Find water, find food. She manages to drink some water off of leaves, and then she finds a tiny miracle, a small bag of candy in the wreckage. That little bag of sweets would be the only thing she ate for the next 10 days. But then she recalled something that would turn out to be way more valuable than food. As she was looking around, she found it. A tiny little spring, just water trickling out of the ground. And in that moment, something clicked. A piece of advice from her dad came flooding back to her. If you get lost in the jungle, find flowing water, follow it. And that one simple instruction, that became her entire survival strategy, her lifeline. So, with her dad's voice in her head as her only map, Julianne starts this journey. A journey that would just push a human being to the absolute brink. For the next 11 days, it was her versus the Amazon. You can imagine the days just blurring together into this waking nightmare. On the fourth day, she comes across a horrifying scene. Another row of seats with 3 passengers still strapped in, all dead on impact. As awful as it was, there was this tiny sliver of relief that her mom wasn't with them. Then, on day 6, a real sign of hope. She hears the call of a hoatzin bird, and because of her upbringing, she knows that bird only lives near big rivers. By day 9, she's so weak she can't even walk anymore, so she just gets into the river and lets the current do the work. And can you imagine this? At one point, she actually hears rescue planes flying overhead. She sees them. She's screaming, waving her arms, doing everything she can, but the jungle canopy is just too thick. They fly right over her. And then, silence. The planes stop coming. The official search was over. In the eyes of the world, including her own dad, she was gone. At that point, she was well and truly on her own. And everything was just piling on. The little bag of candy was a distant memory. The gash on her arm had gotten infected, and it was now infested with maggots, literally eating into her arm. And then there's the mental toll, right? The crushing weight of knowing that nobody is looking for you anymore. It's almost impossible to imagine. So now we're on day 10. She's starving, she's sick with infection, she's just letting the river carry her. Honestly, she's right on the edge of giving up. And then, through the haze, she sees something that feels like a hallucination, a boat. It's a small boat, just tied up on the riverbank. Using what little energy she has left, she follows a little path uphill from the boat, and at the end of the path is a small, empty hut. Inside, she finds a can of gasoline, and again, her jungle knowledge kicks in. She remembers another lesson and pours the gasoline on her arm. The pain must have been unbelievable. But it worked. It forced the maggots to the surface. She painstakingly pulled out over 30 of them. After that, she had nothing left. She couldn't move, so she just waited in the hut. And the next evening, 3 men, local loggers, came back. You have to put yourself in their shoes. They walk up to their hut and find this. This girl, covered in mud, one eye swollen shut, wounds all over her body. She looked like something out of a ghost story. They actually thought she was a Yaku Mama, a mythical water spirit from local folklore. They were terrified. But she managed to speak to them in Spanish and just said, "I'm a girl who was in the Lanza plane crash. My name is Julianne." Well, the loggers took care of her as best they could. It then took another grueling, multi-day trip by boat and truck to finally get her to a hospital. She was safe. She had made it. But the story of what happened on Flight 508, that was far from over. It wasn't until after she was rescued that she finally learned the full, heartbreaking truth. Out of all 86 people on that plane, all the passengers, all the crew, including her own mother, she was the sole survivor, the only one. And this is maybe the most tragic part of the whole story. Investigators eventually figured out that at least 14 other people had also survived the crash itself. But they did what most of us would probably do. They stayed put. They waited for rescue. And sadly, they all died before help could find them. Julianne is the one who survived because she didn't wait. She took matters into her own hands, using her knowledge to actively rescue herself. And what she did with her life after this is just incredible. She actually followed in her parents' footsteps, got her PhD in biology, and dedicated her entire life to studying and protecting the Amazon rainforest. In fact, today she runs Panguana, that very same research station where she grew up, protecting the exact same ecosystem that almost killed her, but in the end was also the key to her survival. Julianne's story is just such a powerful testament to human resilience. You know, it's easy to say she was lucky, and she was, but it was so much more than that. It was her knowledge, her background, and this absolutely unbreakable will to live that made the difference. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? If you were faced with something that seemed completely impossible, what would you do? What hidden strengths would you find inside yourself?